For those of us who are still working, many of us have had to adjust to doing so from home. Thanks to technology, we're discovering that in fact there is a lot which can be done without necessarily heading into the office. But not everybody is able to take advantage of working remotely, and that so called digital divide may have some really big implications for the future of the Golden State, especially in our larger cities. This is a topic that we take on now with Lauren Hepler. She is economy reporter with CalMatters. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And I want to begin because it's interesting. I think so many of us feel like, okay, there's this huge rush now. Everybody is suddenly working from home. But as you discovered in this meeting yesterday, I want to bring up the statistic on my new equivalent of working from home instead of a laptop. According to data from FlexJobs, over the last 5 years, 44% growth in remote jobs. In the last 10 years, 91%. So this was something that was happening for a while, right? Technology's made it possible. But what has started to happen now in the midst of coronavirus where we've actually been forced to stay at home?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So this is kind of a long-term economic shift that we've seen playing out. Lots of people who were consultants or maybe especially folks in the tech industry had maybe dabbled in remote work in the past, but obviously when we started to see counties and then the entire state go into this shelter in place mode in the spring, it kind of plunged everyone into this world of remote work as we're figuring out with these different kinds of online tools and things that, like you mentioned, are only available to a very specific kind of set of the workforce. It's a lot of people in California, which is obviously the home of Silicon Valley, Silicon Beach down in LA. But it's a question of how long these jobs are going to continue to be remote as we navigate this kind of unprecedented health crisis, and what you do about folks who are not in that position.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about some of the challenges in a few moments. But first of all, what I found interesting about this summit that you had yesterday, at this live summit where you talked about all these issues with some stakeholders, and some of them mentioned, look, grueling commutes have been a fact of life for so many of us for so long. Here in Southern California, for sure, certainly in Northern California, where you are as well. And now that we're forced at home, so a lot of times you had people who weren't really invested in their community in the same way because they didn't have the time. They were constantly going back and forth for work and spending hours on the road. And now some of these folks that are home, they're able to invest a little bit more in time in their own local communities. What are some of the silver linings that we're discovering about this new way of working?
Yeah, this whole world of super commutes has been kind of totally flipped on its head in the past few years. There's been a lot of stories about the Inland Empire, folks in the Central Valley commuting to the Bay Area, where you're spending 4, 6 hours a day. Sometimes people are getting separate apartments to live in during the week to be closer to work. And now that's kind of irrelevant. It's really kind of crazy how fast the paradigm has shifted. You've got entire industries that have popped up around tech shuttles and that type of thing that have just stalled entirely for the last several months. And I thought Senator Ana Caballero, who represents the Central Coast and the Central Valley, a lot of areas that have been impacted heavily by commuters moving in for cheaper housing, she said, kind of like you alluded to, there is this upshot now where people are able to, do things that in the past, like do your grocery shopping closer to home. Obviously, a lot of things are closed, so it's a little weird where you can't necessarily get your hair cut or things like that.
Right.
If it comes back to like how long we're going to be working remotely, if those people now don't go into the office as often, or if they don't go back to the office at all, that's really important for the local economies and just kind of also the social interactions day to day, knowing your neighbors, knowing the people your kids go to school with, all those things.
And it could really change the makeup of our bigger cities. I know I've heard a couple reports. A friend of mine, she and her husband both have jobs that they can do remotely. They've got 3 young kids. And once they realize like school isn't happening, we don't need to go into the office, they headed out to the mountains. And they're not the only ones who've done things like this. There are people who are leaving LA saying, why would I deal with the expense of it and the traffic and all the rest of it when I can do all the things that I'm doing now remotely? But what are the consequences of that? I mean, obviously not everyone's going to up and leave San Francisco, Oakland, LA, but if enough people do, what does that mean?
Yeah, so this is something where we're just starting to see kind of the trickle happen on the city side, where rents are dipping a little bit in the big cities, but it's not the kind of big cliff that some people in the real estate industry had worried about. So it seems like we're in kind of a feeling out period right now where, like you say, people are going, maybe I should go to Joshua Tree or to the mountains or to these other places for a few months. But the question will be if they move there permanently. And that's something I know a lot of folks are kind of waiting to see what their job says about when they may have to go back. Obviously, there's just so much uncertainty right now, but it could be kind of a huge shift that builds on top of these record home prices and things that we know people have been scrambling to deal with for the last several years.
As the saying goes, nice work if you can get it. And certainly if you're able to get a job where you can work remotely and you can afford the high-speed internet, hunky-dory, right? But not everybody can. Talk to me about what came out in this conversation around the digital divide and the impact that this new era of working remotely that we're in right now, what does that mean for all of this?
Yeah, I think people have kind of an idea, okay, the digital divide, we realize not everyone has like the same high speed internet, ability to stream video, those types of things. But in this case, Senator Ana Caballero, again, who's from the Salinas area, said that in some parts of her district, up to 90% of the people in areas don't have internet connection. So we're just talking about a baseline, like your kid can't log into online classes, you can't look for work online. So these are just things, it's so different than the scenario we were just talking about for people doing all kinds of like marketing work or other professional work wherever they kind of want to be based and seeing how long they can do that. This is a completely different economy we're talking about where people can't tap into those opportunities. And one of the massive questions now is what do you do to sort of get the broadband infrastructure in the state to sort of help maybe level that playing field, which again is something that people have been working on and just hasn't happened. It's hugely expensive. There's a lot of political questions about who the internet providers will be, what kind of competition there will be between them, and what that ultimately means for how much people pay. So there are big questions to be worked out, but as several people we spoke with yesterday pointed out, Lily Gangas, who's with the KPOR Center up in Oakland, which is a group that works on tech and equity, she's really focused on these questions around reskilling and kind of how you figure out getting people the internet access and then use that to hopefully get them into better paying jobs. And she said, if that doesn't happen now, when will it happen?
And it's interesting because a lot of people think the digital divide is just about money, but I thought one of the interesting things that came out is it runs deeper than that, right? Undocumented immigrants who are fearful of signing up for low income or free internet access because it requires providing documentation, and they're worried about that. But I want to end, Lauren, on a kind of positive note. And one of the anecdotes that came out yesterday was about a kind of an innovative solution to some of the very real concerns about getting internet access. This had to do with buses and hotspots. Could you share what came up yesterday on that front?
Yeah, so this is just the idea of sort of school districts are one group that's trying to do this, but there's also startups in the space that are sending out hotspots in buses in some cases. They've also been deployed to community centers. And the idea is just to kind of bring the internet service to where people are. And obviously you're doing that in a very low cost way. It's free in this case. So I think we're going to see more experimentation in that area because the state of California hasn't raised the funds, unfortunately, to give every kid a laptop or to provide home internet. So we're going to see things that are kind of trying to provide a stopgap while we need these solutions now.
Lauren Hepler, it's fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for taking the time out to chat with us about it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.